I'm ready to begin adding pore detail to our eyes. But before I get started, I should say that I am using Blender 2.91 as of this video. It was released maybe a couple hours ago. It's got new sculpting tools, I think some sculpt optimizations as well, which are very welcome updates for a complex sculpting project like this. So now that you're aware I have transitioned to a new Blender version, we can focus on these pore details. Now, there is a fairly unsightly ridge at the top of our eyelid, so I want to diminish that. And instead of doing it at the highest sculpt level of 6, I want to do it lower, like a level of 2. Because if I do it low, it doesn't affect those high-res details like the pores. And this kind of detail is a mid-level detail. So it's best to change that at a lower subdivision. I'm just going to hold Shift and smooth this out. I am sculpting with symmetry enabled, which I will do for the majority of the eye sculpt, and maybe add a couple asymmetry details at the end. But that looks a lot more natural. Let's make sure that it still works with the opened eye. So we'll turn our shape key off, and I think that will work fine. Excellent. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to establish, making sure that our eye looks natural, opened and closed. And then when we close it, I can start adding this pore detail that we see in our reference photo. And I will erase this annotation, or at least turn it off, so that we can get a good view of the pore patterns. And the pore pattern I'm seeing is that for the upper crease, the pores are stretched perpendicular to the arc. And then in the middle of the eyelid, it's parallel to the arc. And then at the edge of the eyelid, it returns to being vertical. So let's apply that. We'll jump back to a sculpt level of 6, switch over to our stamp brush. And to double check the settings of our texture, let's see, I really need to split my user interface up a little bit more. I'm going to make this upper panel dedicated to multi-res, and then make 2 more panels, the middle one being the object data, which is where I can change our shape keys. All right, so let's make it as minimal as possible, like this. And then the bottom one can be our tool settings, where we have access to the texture. All right, and specifically the size in X, I want to make that 0.7 because these are a little bit more significantly stretched. And let's start pulling out this pattern. Again, first they're going to be perpendicular to the arc. Maybe increase the strength a little bit, like 2.67. Maybe increase it even more, like to 0.3. There we go. So all of these stamps are stretching towards the center of this arc. And then we will switch it to be parallel. I can also maybe decrease the strength a bit. And then finally, at the edge, we're going to go vertical again. So perpendicular to the arc shape. There we go. That's looking pretty similar to our reference photo. Next, the pattern kind of swoops around the caruncle, and I should probably do this on the other eyelid to make it a little more intuitive. All right, so we're going to be swooping this way. Make it a little bit bigger in size, and then just make my way swooping around. And then the same sort of thing, but a little bit more compressed on the inside corner. And these are fairly deep pores, I would say. So still on the stronger side of the stamp strength. There we go, that's looking pretty good. We can enable our cavity visualization to better diagnose that pattern. And then on the bottom eyelid, we will continue around in an arcing fashion, though I'm going to lower my strength. And actually, it looks like I should orient the pattern in more of a straight line rather than the arc. So let's smooth some of this out. We'll turn off this visualization. Like I said, I don't like the cavity on while I sculpt. So if we smooth some of this out, holding Shift, that should be good enough. And then I'll draw it in a straighter line. There we go. That looks a little bit more like the reference, but it's also going to be emphasized a little bit later when we add the small wrinkles. But often whatever direction the wrinkles are going, it's a safe bet to make the pore pattern also go that direction. So a couple bare spots that I need to address, but then we pretty much have the base layer of pores established, which looks good. Now let's see what it looks like opened. Let's turn off our shape key. And we ran into the error that I was dreading. So I was kind of hoping that Blender 2.91 would have fixed this, but there is a pesky glitch with this current system. You'll notice that I turned off our shape key, but our eyes are still closed. And if I turn the shape key on, it will double the effect and it will ruin it. So this bug happens randomly. I cannot diagnose what causes it, but it's a very silly bug that you'll see me probably run into several times. From now on, I'm going to call it the silly bug, and in the video, just skip right over it because it is fixable, but it's not an easy fix. But I'm going to show you how to do that now. And anytime you see a silly bug skip in the video edit, you'll know that I'm running this fix every time. Okay, so the problem is the shape key data somehow makes the jump away from object data and into the multi-res modifier. So if we turn off multi-res, it disappears. And so what I need to do to fix it is select our head. I'm going to duplicate it and move it off to the side. And then for our original head, let's turn off wireframe. Well, I want overlays on, but I do not want wireframe on. For our original head, we need to remove the multi-res modifier. All right, so we've removed the corrupted data, and to uncorrupt it, let's add another multi-res, and I need to subdivide up to 6 levels. This part stinks because it's going to use a lot of memory. And if you're already on a machine that's struggling with this amount of polygons, this is only going to make it worse. I'm going to subdivide up to a level of 6. You can see my RAM just jumping up. Each level slowing down. I'm at 5, now at a level of 6. All right, that was like 15 seconds of waiting. I'm at 5 gigs of RAM. But now that I have a fresh multi-res modifier, I'm going to go back to the corrupted version, and I'm going to enable the multi-res modifier. All right, and back to the original, I want to enable that shape key, okay, the eyes closed. And I'm going to transfer this corrupted data over to the uncorrupted version with the shape key, if that makes sense. So now that I've got it set up, I'm going to select the corrupted version, shift select the new version, and in the shape options of the multi-res modifier, I'm going to click reshape, making sure that both are on a level of 6. This one is not on a level of 6 in the viewport. So let's do that. Now we're looking at 7 gigs of RAM. This is why I call it a silly bug to fix. And so selecting the corrupted version, shift selecting the new version, and we can choose that reshape option. And fingers and toes crossed, that should be the way to fix it. Yeah, okay. So to test it, they look the same, but I should be able to turn off the shape key now in the new version, and yes, the eyes open back up. So we can delete this corrupted version, make sure you save. And again, this happens periodically. It's very annoying. I know people have reported it as a bug. I do hope it gets fixed. It's super annoying to work with, but also for you to watch. So that is how we fix it. And after all that, we can continue sculpting, but not before I save my scene. Okay, where were we? Okay, right. So we have added the first layer of pore details. But having looked at the eye this closely again, there's also some mid-level details that we need to update, especially on the inside corner of the eye, the caruncle. If we compare that to a reference photo like this one, this is a good one, you can see that there's more happening there than our simplified version. Also, this inside ridge is kind of blocky, so we want to smooth that out. I think I have a better picture up here of what that kind of looks like. So when it comes to adjusting mid-level details, we don't want to do that at the 6th level of subdivision. We want to do that at a lower level. Like I'm going to try it at 2. And, oh, it didn't change because I'm in object mode. But while I'm at it, let's change the level viewport back to 2 for optimization's sake, and then back to sculpt mode. What I want to do, maybe 2 is a little too low. How about 3? Okay, once I get to 3, we're starting to see some pore detail lightly poke up, so I don't want to go higher than this. And I want to smooth out, let's switch over to my pen. And I'm going to smooth the inside because there's not this distinct ridge in here. We can also try with the fill brush. There we go, that seems to work a little bit better. There we go, smooth that out. And on the inside, it's tight on the upper edge, but not so tight on the bottom. Also, the caruncle has a much tighter crease in here. Let's add that first. Whoa. Maybe jump up to 4 for this change. We're getting a little bit low res. All right, now at 4 with the crease brush, I can cut this in tighter. And then use my inflate brush with the I hotkey to tighten up the crease. I want that to be very tight. All right, that's looking better. And then on the bottom edge, it seems to smooth out. Let's try the flatten brush. Yeah, to smooth that out. Yeah, I like that. Okay, now as far as the details of the caruncle, I think the other photo is a little bit better since we're on this side of the eye. Where did that one go? This one right here. Okay, so kind of like a brain material almost, but I want to flatten out the inside membrane with the inflate brush, just holding control to flatten that out. And then add a couple creases, not randomly. I'm trying to make it match the art, but it's also kind of difficult to describe exactly what shapes I'm creating. I think brain is an appropriate word. But I also want to remember that this is going to be zoomed out. I'm not going to be terribly close to this. It just needs to not be flat like it was originally. And I think that this is going to work pretty well if I tighten up these creases. I don't want to make it too intense in terms of the shape, which I think I have done a little bit. What I mainly need to remember is that the caruncle catches the highlights and reflections in a unique way, in a very distinguished way. So I'm going to go with this. I think that will be fine. But also remember that once we get to the shading and lighting portion, I'm going to smooth out the bottom edge a little bit, round it over. Once we get to the shading and lighting, I can always jump back into sculpt mode and adjust the caruncle if it's not looking great. But I think as kind of a brain mattery material, I think we're at least on the right track. And as I'm spending more and more time here, there is an issue that I see with the upper eyelid. The crease needs to be moved further backward because a lot of inside eye corners catch a lot of shadow. And right now, I don't think that will happen with my shapes. And so this is a change I'm not going to do in sculpt mode, but I'm going to do in edit mode and let that propagate through multi-res. So let me save my scene. But in edit mode, this will be a lot easier to adjust. So if we go back to our basis shape, the issue is that these edges right here need to be pushed further back, not with proportional editing, something more like this. But I'm going to select the whole upper edge, or most of it, and rotate using the 3D cursor, which was left at the center of the eye. Okay, my pivot is the 3D cursor. So let me, let's see, I need to find a good angle. Let's rotate in X. I don't know if X is the right axis. Maybe push it a little bit this way. Okay, I think that's looking better. I want to keep them in line. So the orientation that kind of got wobbly with that rotation operation, I'm going to fix that. Keep the verts in line better with their neighbors. Okay. I think that's going to be good. It's going to be an improvement. And then I'm going to even out the spans by selecting these edge loops, basically the eyelid specific edge loops. I need to, before I isolate them, let's hit Shift-Control-M, which will mirror the selection, and I want to enable extend so we get both sides Shift H to hide everything except these edge loops. And then I can very easily even out our spans with the edge slide tool. And there's nothing visually occluding that. Okay, so Alt H to unhide everything else. And now tab to sculpt mode, and there we go. So that change looks a lot better. It's a deeper crease on the inside corner. So you'll see me do that from time to time, and there's nothing wrong with making changes in edit mode. Specifically, edit mode changes will affect the shape key as well as the multi-res modifier. So these changes are like core shape changes. So at this point, I feel like we've adjusted some mid-level detail pretty well, though mostly on the upper half of the eye. Let's see, as far as the bottom half, I do want to tighten up the edge of the bottom eyelid. Okay, right here. That's definitely sharper than what we have in our sculpture. So with the crease brush, I'll just follow that edge. We don't want to make it, razor sharp, but definitely sharper. The pinch tool can also help here. Okay, that's going to look better. One thing to be aware of whenever you're doing this is you want it to be very even, but it is pretty easy to have this edge end up wobbly, and that's going to be no bueno. You also don't want points, right? Like you can kind of see that there's a point here and a point here. You don't want any corners. Okay, I think that looks good. Now looking at this eye, I feel like I can exaggerate the infraorbital rim a little bit. Maybe push inward that span. All right, just kind of doing a second pass, making sure that all my mid-level shapes are good. Yeah, I think that's an improvement. Slight, but a good improvement, which when you're detailing, you want to make sure that this is perfect, so there's no better time to do that. And with those mid-level changes, feeling good about them, let's jump back to the highest level and continue adding pore level detail. And finally, we're ready to use a different stamp. So in my tool settings, actually I need to go to texture settings and also choose the correct brush, which is the draw brush. I've got Skin Pores A, and I don't know why I named it this way. I should have just copied the name from here and modified it, so Skin Pores Big. Yeah, I don't know why I made that Skin Pores A and just built in a naming inconsistency. But I want to make it a fake user so that this texture is always there for me to access, even if it's not plugged into the brush. But now that it is, I'm going to remove it and click New and go find the next texture, which I will find via the thumbnail view. Okay, it's this one right here, Skin Wrinkles Big. Let's open that one. And I will copy the name. Make sure to keep these named appropriately, Skin Wrinkles Big. And then add a fake user here as well. All right, so let's see what this texture looks like. If I draw out the pattern, the idea is to make it look like these kind of broader wrinkles. And this texture will work fine with it. I suppose we should look at the texture itself in the image editor. So you can see that this pattern is in the ballpark of the pattern in the eyelid, the lower eyelid especially. And so I am going to start by stretching it out. Let's see, what value is it stretched at? We'll go to the tool settings. The X value is at 0.7. I want to go to like 0.6, make it a little bit more stretched out, and maybe increase the strength. And just get a feel for this texture. Okay, I like it, but maybe not. Yeah, I'll leave it there for now. But remember that pattern that we started with, how it kind of loops around the lower inside corner of the lower eyelid? I want to re-emphasize that with this texture. And let's see, I didn't love how that went on. I think it's maybe a little bit too strong. Let's go back down to 2.5-ish. And maybe the 0.6 stretch is too much. Let's go back to 0.7. Really just trying to get a feel for how this is going to go on. There we go. Starting to get a feel for that pattern. Nice. I think that's working out pretty well. It is important to remember that this guy is slightly smiling, so that could skew how pronounced these details are. Let's go back down to one of these other people. How about this one? Oh yeah, I remember this is the one that I liked. So the pores are pretty pronounced. These like wrinkle pores are very pronounced on the inside, and then they get pretty subtle towards the outside. So let's focus on that, increase the strength. Now, I'm going to start with the texture stamp, but I'm going to finalize the shape with a crease brush and adding these wrinkles or reinforcing these wrinkles by hand. So Shift-C to go back to the crease brush. I want to use a small brush size, and I'm going to hold Control and just cut in some subtle creases. The stamp has a limitation whenever you stretch it that you can get kind of a jagged effect. And then when you come back over it with the crease brush, it smooths that effect out. And so just keeping an eye on the reference, creating wrinkles like this. Pretty simple because the texture has done most of the work for us. And we're just basically reinforcing certain creases that were started with that texture. All right, it's good to zoom out and get a feel for it. It can be easy to over detail a certain spot, and it starts to become too much. Let's go back to our stamp and continue that texture down this way. Kind of highlighting the infraorbital rim. And then also on the crease of the lower eye. But yeah, you can see how these textures are starting to come together and create a much more convincing whole. What's really going to help is these small little creases kind of running straight from the interior corner to the outside corner. You want to make sure that your brush size is pretty small for these. Whoops, I'm not on the right brush. Shift-C. Let's see how that works. Pretty good, at least for a first pass. So you don't want to make too many of these wrinkles. There's only a few, and if you do too many, it does start to look weird. All right, kind of keep your memory as to where you put those. Maybe we can increase the strength. Okay, that didn't work out too well. I have a bad habit of making too many of these creases. They're not hard to create, but getting them balanced can be a little difficult. If you go too hard, before long, you know, it's looking like an old man. Which, if you're going for a young man, that's obviously a problem. If you're going for an old man, keep doing what you're doing. All right, and then maybe a little bit of a pinch as the final measure. Now, what's nice about doing the wrinkles after you've laid down the pores is that the crease brush has some pinch built in, and obviously pinch does too, but it's going to take those existing pore textures and suck them into the crease and the wrinkles. And that's a very convincing final effect. And I still think that my little wrinkles are not as pronounced as they need to be. All right, I'm going to undo that. I want to keep the brush really small or zoom in pretty close. There we go. There we go. That's what I'm after. You really need enough geometry to make this happen, like in your sculpture. And we're at, I forget, 13 million polys, which should be enough. Okay, yeah, that kind of thing. Okay, then let's go back to our stamp and continue some of this texture pattern. Like we have all this lovely custom skin pattern, and then it just quickly transitions to the generic stuff. We don't want to do that, or we don't want to leave it that way. So let's make a subtle texture pattern and continue sort of encircling that infraorbital rim down there. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Let's continue with this texture up into the upper eyelid. I definitely want to save my scene as well. And before I leave the lower eyelid, it does look like the texture makes its way into the rim, or sorry, the edge of the eyelid, just a little bit. Okay, now I want to close the eyelid and sculpt some of these wrinkles on the upper side. This involves enabling the shape key, so I'm going to save the file one more time just to be sure. And then we will turn our shape key on and hope that it works. Well, it should work always when you're turning it on. It's turning it off that's the problem. So yeah, there's some detail in here that we can now add using this texture, this wrinkle big texture. And you can try holding control to see what kind of effect that does. I accidentally held control on that one and kind of like the effect, so I'm going to leave it. But yeah, layering this pattern over what we've already created, it's going to do a lot. But we really created a pretty decent effect up here already. Mainly, I wanted to add wrinkles like, let's go back to that reference. Wrinkles like this, okay? So we can do that with Shift-C once again. Keep our brush size small, hold control. Then once I make a few lightly, I'll come back in tighter and add those creases. And even if you get off of the original line, that's okay because wrinkles tend to do that. They kind of branch off slightly. They're not perfectly smooth or anything. So yeah, that's going to be fine. In fact, I'll do that on purpose. I'll just lightly be off from that original wrinkle. Okay, I feel like the wrinkle pattern or the pore pattern gets a little bit strong up here. So let's go back to our stamp brush. Maybe just a stronger version of our original texture, the skin pores big. Let's try that at a higher strength. And I did do that with control accidentally, but I like it. All right, there are some creases or some wrinkle patterns coming out of the very corner of the outside. So let's stretch this pattern out a bit more, like, well, 7's actually fine. Yeah, that's good. That works out well. So, I mean, look at how far we've gotten, how unique this detail is with only 2 skin textures. You really don't need that many to achieve a believable result. I know some texture packs for skin alphas come with like 30 different textures. You don't need that many. But if you layer them well, you'll end up getting a really nice result. And I think we're about done with the eye details. The final test will be opening the eye. Control S to save before I do that. And wouldn't you know it, I saved the file and it exploded on me. So here comes a silly bug fix. Okay, we are back in business. You can see I've got the eyes opened. And what's nice is when you sculpt that detail on the closed version, when you open it and your deformation makes sense, then you get very realistic wrinkles in both versions. Like trying to sculpt this sort of wrinkles nice and tight in such a compressed area would be very difficult, if not impossible, to get looking perfect unless you close the eye. All right, so that's a really useful tool. I highly recommend you employ that. And yeah, this looks pretty good for the eyes. I feel ready to move on to the lips next.